By moonlight and candle smoke, let us descend into the catacombs of time. There, amongst the cobwebbed corridors of cultural memory, a figure haunts us still. His name whispered on velvet drapes and echoed in opera houses long silenced. The Phantom of the Opera, a spectre born not of flesh alone, but of longing, madness, and cinematic obsession. It is now a century since his shadow first flickered upon the silver screen, and yet his masked visage remains unforgotten, undiminished, and disturbingly intimate. Permit me, dear listeners, to wax poetic with ink black as midnight and sentiment heavy as incense in a Parisian crypt. There is no mere stroll through the decades, no dusty archival detour. What lies ahead is an exhaustion, an ecstatic dissentiment of film reels, fractured dreams, and fevered interpretations. Think of this as less historical treatise, more seance, a communion with the many faces of Eric, our melancholy maestro. And oh, what faces he has worn, from the silent screen of Lon Chaney's skull-like transformation to the velvet purr of Claude Rains, the bombast of Herbert Lom, the tragic pout of Robert England, and the rock god theatrics of Gerard Butler. Each incarnation a mirror cracked and trembling, reflecting the anxieties of its age. What began as Gaston Leroux's pulp romance has since metastasized into a grand Gothic opera of celluloid and shadow. In this anthology, we shall waltz with the ghosts, we shall trace the inkblots of adaptation and mutation, we shall praise and pillory, we shall wonder aloud at the strange endurance of this story and why it refuses to go gentle into the cinematic night. For the Phantom is not merely a character, he is a myth wearing grease paint. He is trauma recast as melody. He is beauty disfigured and thus made eternal. Join me. The curtain rises, the chandelier trembles, the century beckons. The opera is a house of masks, but none so compelling as the one that hides the soul. From the scribbled margins of a draft circa 1924, stained with espresso and dreams, let us descend once more into the gilded oubliette of the Opera Garnier, where velvet hangs heavy with secrets and the chandeliers hold their breath in anticipation of ghostly gossip. In 1910, French journalist turned dreamweaver Gaston Leroux birthed a monster swathed in shadows and romantic agony, a figure part Svengali, part Satan, and wholly misunderstood. Le Fantôme de l'Opéra, that grand Gothic fable of unrequited obsession and subterranean song, was a strange beast even in its native tongue. A serialized novel crouched between mystery, melodrama, and psychological horror. When Universal Pictures chose to adapt Leroux's tale for the silent screen in 1925, they weren't merely translating a story, they were transmuting a fever dream into myth. And like all alchemists worth their salt, they meddled with the materials, folded in terror where once lay tenderness, and igniting the monstrous sublime in the visages of the damned. Director Rupert Julian, a man known as much for his temper as his eye, took Leroux's moody manuscript and refashioned it into a celluloid nightmare. Gone was the subtle spectral mystery of the novel. What emerged instead was operatic hysteria, thick with fog and madness. But it wasn't Julian alone who summoned this vision. No, dear listeners, Universal, then drunk on the success of the Hunchback of Notre Dame, had found its new martyr in Lon Chaney, a man who painted agony upon his face with wire, wax, and unparalleled commitment to the grotesque. Chaney's Eric the Phantom is no brooding poetic spectre, but a living corpse in formal wear, his skeletal death's head revealed in a moment that shattered audiences' composure like glass beneath a soprano's high C. This was not merely adaptation, it was desecration made divine. Leroux's Eric, for all his cruelty, bore the weight of a man cursed with genius and ugliness in equal measure. Chaney's was fury incarnate. Let us now glance side along at those steps who followed in Eric's blood-stained footsteps. Claude Rains, in Universal's 1943 Technicolor reimagining, shed the mask for pathos. His Phantom, a disfigured violinist, exchanged the menace of the catacombs for the melancholy of the lost artistry. Herbert Lom's portrayal in Hammer's 1962 Gothic rendition continued the tragic thread, giving us a phantom less monstrous than misunderstood, soaked in tragic grandeur rather than terror. One might say he wore his heart on his sleeve, albeit a tattered one. Then came the 1989 Phantasmagoria, starring Robert Englund, a gory operetta of flesh, sewing, and devilish pacts, where Eric becomes a slasher icon rather than a tragic muse. It was opera filtered through entrails, a demonic waltz that traded velvet for viscera. And what of Andrew Lloyd Webber? Ah, yes, the maestro of chandelier dropping Broadway spectacle. In 1986, he replaced horror with haunting. His phantom crooned rather than cursed, seduced rather than stalked. The theatregoers swooned, the purists groaned. Webber's Eric may wear the mask, but his face is that of a rock star poet aching for connection, not control. LaRue offered us an ending steeped in bittersweet resignation. Eric, dying of love, allows Christine to go free, her kiss redeeming him. But Julian and Universal flirted with alternate finales like a coquette or the masquerade. One ending saw Eric die of a broken heart in his lair, much like LaRue intended. Another had the mob deliver justice in the form of fists and fury beside the Seine, a brutish ballet of moral clarity that denied the Phantom any redemption. Test audiences wrinkled their noses, producers panicked, reshoots ensued. The film was recut, reordered, reimagined, somewhere beneath a romantic tragedy and a horror parade float. The final release was stitched together like Frankenstein's monster, yet somehow gloriously alive. So where does that leave us? A century hence, sipping wine and typing on laptops under the flicker of gas lamp mood lighting? The Phantom of the Opera remains an internal figure, not because he terrifies, but because he represents that exquisite pain we dare not name. The ache of being unseen, unlovable, yet desperate to create beauty from within. Julian's adaptation may have strayed from LaRue's elegant despair, but in doing so, it birthed a mythology of masks that still dances across stages and screens. Every Phantom since has chased the same note, half horror, half heartbreak. And in that echo, we find a truth as old as tragedy itself. Beneath every monster lies a man with a broken song. In the vast mausoleum of cinema's past, there lies a spectral figure whose face has haunted generations. Not because it was seen, but because it was revealed. Lon Chaney, the man of a thousand faces, was no mere actor. He was an alchemist of the grotesque, conjuring anguish and terror from wax and wire, shadow and silence. And in 1925, beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Paris Opera House, conjured on Universal's backlot like a fever dream of Gothic excess, he achieved his magnum opus, The Phantom of the Opera. Chaney's transformation into Eric, the opera ghost, was no simple matter of grease paint and prosthetics. Nay, this was a self-inflicted metamorphosis, a cruel devotional rite. He stretched his nostrils with fishhooks, pulled back his lips with piano wire, stuffed cotton into his cheeks, and contorted his nose with collodion and spirit gum until he became the very spectre that LaRue's fevered imagination had birthed. Witnesses on set reportedly recoiled in real terror. It was not performance, it was possession. The result? A revelation. The reveal of Chaney's ghastly visage in the catacombs remains one of the most seismic shocks in silent cinema. A jolt not merely of fright, but of empathy twisted by horror. His phantom was not the debonair recluse we would come to see in later years, but a tragic wretch, equal parts Mephistopheles and martyr. This duality, this tightrope walk between monstrous and misunderstood, laid the foundation upon which every subsequent phantom would totter. Cloud Rain and the Technicolor sprawl of 1943 became the tragic artist disfigured by acid, his descent not from birth but from betrayal. Herbert Lom, in the blood-tinted grandeur of Hammer's 1962 adaptation, leaned into melancholic villainy, a phantom forged by society's indifference. Robert England, ever the sadistic showman, sliced his way through the 1980s in a slasher-infected fever dream. And of course, Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical Wrath, perhaps the most culturally ubiquitous, swapped horror for high romance, crooning beneath the chandelier with yearning rather than rage. Yet all of them, every last phantom, owed debt to Chaney. His influence was not confined to narrative or design, it permeated cinema's very DNA. The idea that the monster is also the victim, that the face behind the mask might inspire pity rather than revulsion. This was Chaney's gospel. His Phantom is cinema's first anti-hero in full, a sympathetic spectre long before capes and cows became a genre of their own. And let us not forget his legacy behind the lens. Chaney's refusal to allow studio makeup artists near his face gave birth to the actor as architect, the performer who carves the mask himself. In his wake came Karloff, Lugosi, even Brando in his monstrous mumble. Every character actor who lost themselves in latex and madness owes a nod to the man who first made the grotesque beautiful. He died in 1930, silenced by throat cancer, before the talkies could claim his growl. But he remains eternal, not just in celluloid, but in spirit. Every time a horror film dares to ask us to empathise with the beast, every time a mask slips to reveal a wound, it is Chaney we are glimpsing beneath the flesh. So raise your glass, dear reader, to the man who made the shadows sing. For behind every mask there is pain, and behind that, if we dare to look closely enough, there is Lon Chaney. To enter the Paris Opera House of 1925 is to descend into a sanctuary sculpted not from stone but from shadows and suggestion. And yet, for all the ghosts that lurk beneath its painted ceilings and velvet curtains, none are more commanding than the spectre of sound or its absence. For the Phantom of the Opera, a film birthed in the throes of the silent era, music was not mere accompaniment, it was divinity, a sacred ritual, the film's heartbeat. Lon Chaney's Phantom did not snarl through dialogue, he sermonized through symphony. He seduced, stalked, and damned with every stroke of an organ key. And in those swelling, crashing waves of music, the silent screen screamed. Let us not mistake silence for stillness. In the cathedral of Gaston Leroux's tale, lovingly distorted through Rupert Julian's dark lens, sound itself becomes a character, one more tragic and volatile than Christian Diet, or even the Phantom himself. The Opera House, with its subterranean lake and sepulchral corridors, is a place where sound is distorted, echoing with the hollow resonance of unspoken longing and madness. The organ, that infernal machine, is not an instrument, it is confession, obsession, lamentation. Original audiences would have heard the film accompanied by live orchestras or lone pianists channeling the music through their fingertips like the mediums at a seance. The film's score changed depending on the theatre, the town, the mood of the maestro. No two showings were identical, each one a spiritual possession of the silver screen. Phantom was a living opera rewritten by silence and breath, and then the sound version. In 1930, Universal retrofitted the film with a synchronized soundtrack and dubbed vocals. Some praised it as a rebirth, but others felt the Phantom's spell was broken. A creature once made of candlelight and bone rattling silence was now shackled to static dialogue and clumsy exposition. The cathedral had been wired for sound, and the ghost recoiled, and yet the organ remained. What power resides in that infernal instrument? As the phantom's talons danced across the keys, it summoned more dread than any scream. No modern adaptation, be it Claude Rain with his acid-scarred bass, Herbert Lom's tortured composer, Robert England's slasher phantom, or even Andrew Lloyd Webber's velvet and lace romanticism, has ever quite captured the awe of that thunderous silence punctuated by a single note. Modern phantoms speak too much. They are too human. Chaney's phantom howled through melody. He became the music. In the end, the 1925 Phantom is less a film and more a requiem mass. Its language is not English or French, but something deeper, the ancient dialect of pain, desire, and death, sung through bowstrings and ivory keys. Let the record show it was not silence that made the Phantom great, it was the silence between the notes. In the cavernous belly of the Palais Garnier, or rather its meticulously conjured phantom double built on the Universal backlot, the silent phantom of the opera found its true cathedral, a place not of God, but of grotesquerie grandeur and unrelenting gaze. What is the Phantom's Lair, if not a sanctum sanctimonious of shattered beauty and compulsive longing? Let us wander as pilgrims through a fever dream into the vast Gothic temple imagined by art director Ben Carre and production designer Charles D. Hall. A symphony of arches and shadows. Their work was no mere recreation of Parisian opulence. It was a psychogeographic descent. An opera house turned labyrinth, a cathedral turned prison. Here, the verticality of Gothic design, spires, vaults, and vertiginous staircases mirrors Eric's own internal torment, reaching upward as he himself remains trapped below. The architecture is storytelling in stone and plaster. The grand chandelier, both crown and executioner, becomes a symbol of suspended doom, until, like Icarus's own son, it falls. The Phantom's subterranean realm, a gondola ride through the river Styx, contrasts wildly with the opulence above, reflecting the split psyche of a man who once longed to rise into the light, but has become a ghost to the living world. This set is no static background, it is character, it breathes, it swallows Christine. It trembles under the weight of Eric's rage. It is built to oppress and awe, to reinforce the theme of duality, the sacred versus the profane, beauty versus deformity, the world above and the hell below. Indeed, the set design would influence Gothic horror cinema for generations, from James Whales's Frankenstein laboratories to Hammer's cryptic corridors. Echoes of this opera house reverberate through time like an eternal organ chord. Even Andrew Lloyd Webber's stage musical, in all its bombastic decadence, cannot resist homage. His Falling Chandelier and Boat of Dreams are direct inheritance from Julian's silent blueprint. And what of symbolism? The opera house is society, masked and gilded. Eric the Phantom is its consequence, an aberration bred from its basements. The corridors are arteries of repression. The mirror through which Christine vanishes is not an illusionist's trick, it is a metaphor for entering the subconscious, for embracing what polite society denies. We watch the opera and the opera watches us. It is voyeurism gilded in red velvet. and in Lon Chaney's grim visage revealed in a set piece that plays like a liturgical unmasking, we are reminded that all sacred spaces have their demons. As one wanders through the haunted edifice, the sensation is clear. The Phantom of the Opera is not merely set in a Gothic opera house, it is one. Few films wear their fractures quite as elegantly as The Phantom of the Opera. Though now revered as one of the great achievements of silent horror, its masking was less a symphony and more a cacophony. Directorial disputes, shifting visions, endless recuts, and one star whose iron was still often the only anchor. What remains is a beautiful Frankenstein of a film, stitched together from studio desperation, creative conflict, and a flair for the dramatic that defined Universal's golden age. At the heart of the chaos lies Rupert Julian, a theatre trained actor and journeyman director whose name appears in the credits but whose influence over the final product remains spectral. His clashes with Lon Chaney were legendary. Chaney, a fiercely creative force with a precise vision for his characters, often refused to take direction. On many days, Julian wouldn't even speak directly to his star. Chaney, for his part, reportedly directed his own scenes, shaping the Phantom's pathos and menace through sheer stubborn artistry. Whether due to these tensions or his own shortcomings, Julian was eventually removed from the project. Universal scrambled to salvage the shoot. Enter Edward Sedgwick and Ernst Lamel, each brought in at various stages to shoot new material or repair narrative ends. Sedgwick, known for his comedic work with Buster Keaton, tried to inject romance and levity into the film's darker recesses. Lamel, nephew of Universal head Carl Lamel, became something of a patchwork foreman, attempted to unify divergent pieces into a marketable whole. What emerged from this creative scrum was hardly a singular vision. In fact, multiple versions of the Phantom of the Opera circulated for years, each with different edits, intertitles, and even actors in key roles. Notably, Mary Philbin's love interest, Raoul, portrayed alternatively by Norman Kerry, or with reshot scenes from another actor in certain reissues. The most infamous moment of this production patchwork is the film's ending. Early audiences reacted so poorly to the original climax, where Eric dies quietly of a broken heart, that Universal commissioned a new action packed chase ending. Chaney, unsurprisingly, refused to return. His absence forced the crew to use stand ins and quick cuts, adding to the jagged quality of the film's finale. For decades, this dual ending oddity haunted film restorers, and only recent efforts have brought some cohesion to the film's various prints. Despite the chaos, The Phantom of the Opera gave birth to one of the Universal's most iconic achievements, the Paris Opera House set. Designed by Charles D. Hall and built to full scale on stage 28, the massive structure was a marvel of studio engineering. 5 stories tall with working elevators, staircases, and backstage corridors that would feature in countless Universal productions for decades. More than just a backdrop, the Opera House became the architectural heart of the film, its labyrinthine design mirroring Eric's twisted psyche. From the grand chandelier to the shadowy catacombs below, the set symbolized the collusion of artifice and emotion, a stage on which the tragic grotesque could play out with operatic grandeur. Universal's marketing team leaned hard into this opulence. Pre release promotions touted the realism and scale of the set, and Chaney's grotesque makeup was shrouded in secrecy to fuel curiosity. When the curtain finally rose, audiences were not just watching a movie, they were stepping into a cinematic cathedral built from horror and heartbreak. In the dim, candlelit corridors and vertiginous staircases of the Phantom of the Opera lies a deep debt to German Expressionism, a cinematic movement that left an indelible mark on horror during the silent era. While the film is proudly American, its visual soul often drifts through the distorted dreamscapes of German classics like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, whose stylized aesthetics helped shape the visual grammar of horror cinema. Though Phantom doesn't lean fully into the extreme angularity and painted shadows that defined expressionist sets, its moody chiaroscuro lighting, cavernous layers, and symbolic use of architecture all channel the spirit of the movement. The Paris Opera House becomes a labyrinthine purgatory with secret doors, subterranean lakes, and impossibly steep staircases that twist and descend like something from a fevered hallucination. Lon Chaney's Phantom 2 feels born of this tradition. His grotesque visage and tortured, isolated psyche, akin to Cagliari's Cesare or Murnau's Count Orlak. He is less monster than metaphor, a manifestation of anguish, obsession, and decay, lurking beneath society's grandest stage. Expression reveled in such figures, outsiders who moved through broken worlds, their inner torments reflected in warped surroundings. In Phantom, the opulence of the opera is a fragile mask of this subterranean madness. Universal's production didn't imitate German expressionism so much as absorb it, combining its stylized shadows with Hollywood scale and narrative structure. The result was a transatlantic hybrid, a film both gothic and grotesque, tethered to melodrama, yet haunted by European horror. And this synthesis would prove influential. Just a few years later, Universal would lean more heavily into expressionist stylings with Dracula in 1931 and Frankenstein of the same year, cementing a house style that echoed the shadows of Weimar cinema. The Phantom of the Opera may not always be cited alongside Caligari or Nosferatu in academic treatises or expressionism, but its DNA is unmistakable. It stands as one of the first major American horror films to weave that spectral influence into the foundations of studio filmmaking, proof that the horror genre, even in its infancy, was already a global dialogue in shadow and silence. For all its eerie grandeur, The Phantom of the Opera is not simply a tale of terror. It's a deeply tragic story of longing, beauty, and unrequited love. At its core lies a desperate ache for connection, veiled by a mask of terror. While Lon Chaney's Phantom may haunt the opera house, it is his tortured soul, wounded by rejection and driven by a perverse devotion, that makes him unforgettable. This is where the film transcends its genre roots. Unlike the mindless monsters of early horror tales, Eric is painfully aware of his deformity and isolation. He composes music, writes letters, and navigates the underground labyrinth of his own making, not as a beast, but as a man shaped by the cruelty of others. His obsession with Christine is not merely a possessive infatuation, it's a twisted hope for redemption through love. She becomes his muse, his salvation, and ultimately his undoing. This romantic fixation draws clear lines back to the Gothic tradition, the brooding figures of Frankenstein or the Hunchback of Notre Dame, but with a sharper emotional intimacy. Where Frankenstein's creature lashes out against his creator and society, and Quasimodo resigns himself to fate, Eric is actively trying to shape his world, rewriting his tragedy as a love story, even as it inevitably collapses into horror. The film also plays with the dualities of beauty and monstrosity. Christine, caught between the dashing Raoul and the shadowy Phantom, becomes more than a damsel. She's the axis of a moral and emotional triangle. Her eventual pity for Eric, especially in the final scenes, brings an exceptional grace to the story. Unlike many horror films of the era, Phantom grants its monster a moment of tenderness before death, a silent farewell not just to Christina but to the dream of being loved. Chaney's performance imbues this romantic tragedy with raw, physical emotion. His gestures are operatic yet sincere. Every tilt of the head or clutch of the heart echoes with yearning. When he reveals his face to Christine, the horror is visceral, but so too is the heartbreak. In the end, The Phantom of the Opera is less a monster movie and more a requiem for those who live in the shadows, yearning to be seen. It tapped into the universal fear, not of creatures lurking in the dark, but of being unloved and alone. That's the true horror at the heart of The Phantom, and perhaps why a century later we still feel his pain. Few cinematic figures have endured quite like the Phantom. Rising from the shadows of Silent Hero's soundstage, Lon Chaney's masked outsider has taken on a life well beyond the flicker of nitrate film. More than just a horror character, the Phantom has become a symbol of unrequited love, artistic obsession, and the monstrous within us all. And from film to stage, parody to prestige, his presence continues to echo through popular culture. The legacy of the Phantom of the Opera is perhaps most visible in the realm of theatre. Andrew Lloyd Webber's 1986 musical reimagining catapulted the Phantom to mainstream global fame. Romanticised and operatic in a way that Chaney's original never intended, the musical softened the grotesque and lead into the tragic yearning. It was a Phantom tailored for new audiences, less terrifying, more tortured. Still, it retained the core elements of secrecy, seduction, and spectacle, paying homage to the original's grandeur, even as it remixed its emotional palette. Its success, over 13,000 performances on Broadway and counting, cements Phantom not just as a cinematic relic, but as a living myth. But stage success is just one thread in the Phantom's sprawling afterlife. Hollywood has returned to the Opera House time and again, from the 1943 Technicolor remake starring Claude Rains to Hammer's Gothic revision in 1962 to the campy rock version Phantom of the Paradise in 1974, and even a heavy metal slasher rendition in the form of 1989's Phantom of the Opera with Robert Englund. These remakes, reinterpretations, and reimaginings speak less to fidelity and more to the character's adaptability. The Phantom fits horror, romance, satire, and music equally well. His mask reshaped for every era's anxieties and aesthetics. In pop culture, references abound, from cartoons like Scooby Doo to dark satirical nods in The Simpsons. The Phantom's visage is instantly recognizable. The half mask, the cape, the subterranean lair. He's an icon in the truest sense. Instantly legible, instantly loaded with meaning. Even outside of horror, the trope of the scarred genius lurking beneath society, creating beauty in isolation, owes a debt to Chinese Eric. Academia, too, has embraced Phantom. Scholars dissect it as a prototype of their modern anti hero, a forerunner of Beauty and the Beast archetypes, and a text rich in psychoanalytic subtext, exploring trauma, desire, and the gaze. The Phantom, after all, is not just a villain but a mirror. Whether viewed through the lens of disability, queerness, or outside identity, he reflects back cultural fears and fascinations with startling clarity. And yet, perhaps the greatest legacy of the Phantom of the Opera lies in its mythic status. The original film is no longer just a film, it is legend. It's behind the scenes lore, from lost footage to production feuds. It's technical innovations and Chaney's transformation have merged into a kind of folklore. Like the catacombs beneath the opera house, the Phantom story now tunnels through genre history, always present even when unseen. In every shadowy figure, every haunted genius, every romantic villain scorned by the world, there is something of the Phantom. He lives in sound and silence, in theatre and film, in tragedy and parody. He is deathless because he was never just a man. He is myth. He is mask. He is memory. Even after a century in the shadows, the Phantom of the Opera remains an indelible force. Its mask both a symbol of horror and heartbreak, its underground lair a stage for primal emotions too vast for daylight. The film's enduring power lies in its ability to exist between worlds, the sacred and profane, the beautiful and grotesque, the seen and the unseen. At its heart, the Phantom is more than a monster. He is the ultimate tragic outsider, yearning not just for love, but for recognition, for humanity. Lon Chaney's transformation, so physical yet so intimate, continues to cast a long shadow over every actor who dares don the mask after him. The Paris Opera House set, designed like a Gothic cathedral, stands not only as a marvel of production design, but as a symbolic battleground for the soul where music, love, and horror converge. Throughout this anthology, we've traced the Phantom's trajectory from literary adaptation to silent screen myth, from visual innovation to emotional devastation. We've seen how its themes echo through time: obsession, artistry, and alienation, and how it shaped the very contours of horror cinema in the silent era and beyond. We explored its architectural symbolism, its expressionist lineage, and its shifting cultural legacy, from Andrew Lloyd Webber's romanticized musical to countless reinterpretations in media high and low. And yet there remains something unknowable, something ineffable about the Phantom. Perhaps this is why he refuses to fade. He is not just a character but an archetype, a spectre who haunts not only opera houses but also collective fears and desires. Each generation rediscovers him, reshapes him, yet never fully explains him. In that way, The Phantom of the Opera is more than a film. It is a mirror held up to the darkest corners of the soul, reflecting back our own longings and shadows. And in that reflection, he lives on, not just in reels of nitrate or on stage under chandelier light, but in the very idea of horror as poetry, as tragedy, as truth. A phantom that will never die.